Hello,
Could you start by sharing your full name and where we are here today?
my name is Christopher Wynne Tomos, and we are here in the old school in Narberth.
Great. So can you start by telling me how long you've lived in the Preselis area of North Pembrokeshire for, and perhaps what your first or earliest memories of the place are?
Well, I've lived in the Preselis area from birth, so 56 years in the area, and initially brought up on a farm in Llwyndrain, Fferm Pant y Maen, and then married and lived in Hermon near Crymych during the past 25 years. From an early recollection of growing up on a dairy farm in Llwyndrain, it was a very idyllic upbringing, being able to wander the fields, experience and enjoying hay time. Also remembering first memory of being in a field of wheat, putting skibe together, skibe being clusters of straw stacked up against each other, and an old tractor cutting the straw, cutting the wheat. So yeah, very grateful of that upbringing, growing potatoes, picking potatoes, corner of a field. It wasn't particularly, sort of lavish lifestyle. It was living off the land to some degree, but milking the churns, going to the top of the lane in the early years, and then the tanker coming down, and every now and then getting a special opportunity to have a free sort of spin, a ride on the tanker lorry from one farm to another. So it was very innocent and very idyllic.
And did lots of people have dairy farms back in that day, more than now?
Yes, I would say that during my upbringing, late 1960s and then into the 70s, nearly all farms had differing levels of number of milking cows, but predominantly small rural farms selling milk to the milk marketing board and making a living from that. And then clusters of farms supporting families, sending their children to the local primary school, which were usually Victorian, and then keeping that fabric of 1960s, 1970s way of living, quite basic but enjoyable.
Correct. So, talking a little bit more about the area when you were growing up, who were the important local people? Were there any standout characters locally?
Yes, the 1960s, 1970s particularly, you were still expected to attend Sunday school. So teachers and Sunday teachers and preacher held high regard. And then we had characters of individuals with their jokes and entertaining children. It was good. And then obviously once a year the Sunday school trip to some seaside location was a big event, and singing and poking fun at some few on the bus through singing Mae llongau Mari Pritchard ar y dŵr. And
so where would you normally go then?
I think mostly it was Tenby, Saundersfoot, trying to think if we went
down south of the county then?
Yes, we the Tegri Llwyndrain area was quite close to Newport, and Cardigan, Popate was quite easily accessible, so going south towards below the Lansker line to Tenby, So I just thought it was an experience.
Change of scenery.
Yes, and language.
Yes, definitely. So what kinds of work did people do in the local area of the Preselis to you? Was it mostly agricultural?
Yes, I would say that the majority were people worked in agriculture, would leave school quite early, as soon as they're 15, 16, working in agriculture and making a living early on in life, which was good. But obviously people did go into service industries, banking, accounting. I myself went into office work and accountancy. I was fortunate to be the first year to have the BBC computers in Ysgol Preselis, so having an opportunity to learn some coding and understanding of the new technologies of computers. And then I was also the last year to use physical logbooks in the secondary school. So after our year, it all converted to calculators, and the logbooks were put into storage.
Wow.
So yeah, quite an interesting time really, when that logbook got left, and then the BBC computers came in for people to take up. And I was fortunate to then use some of the first spreadsheets in work to help a business develop. So that was quite when you're in that period, you just take it for granted. But then looking back, it was quite a transformational period in history. From industrial history had obviously been over the past 200 years, and then moving into the digital era was something that just happened. And you look back, and it was quite a period of in time of transition.
So what was school life like for you in general? Where did you attend primary school? You went to a school, Preselis Secondary. Where did you go to primary?
So our local primary from Llwyndrain was a school, Tegrin, a Victorian primary school in Tegrin, where my father had gone, and my grandmother and my great-grandfather. So we've always been a family living in the area. And I would probably imagine my great-great-grandfather was from Tegrin, so must have attended the early years when the school board were formed in the parish, and the schools were built in the 1880s.
So how many pupils were you in the school back in your day, roughly?
Back in 1970s, I think we were about 40, 45 maybe, and I remember looking not so long ago that fluctuation in population. Then you had 30 numbers, then it would climb back to 50, 60, back to 40, down 35. So it all depends on the birth rate and how many families are living in the area. But at the moment, obviously, with house prices being so high, the numbers of young family is a real problem for rural schools.
So is the school Tegrin still open now?
So during Pembrokeshire County Council's time to re-examine the number of primary schools, they decided to amalgamate Ysgol Tegrin and Ysgol Bwlch-y-Groes to create Ysgol Clydau, and Ysgol Bwlch-y-Groes was closed, but they did battle to save it, but unfortunately were unable to do so. But the community in Bwlch-y-Groes rallied around and bought the school site, so it's now a community building, and the old asbestos hall has been demolished, and a brand new village hall has gone up next to the Victorian primary school, which is a Cilch Meithrin children's nursery in the old Victorian building.
So Ysgol Clydau is thriving still now?
From what I understand, again, fluctuation in population, there has been a reduction in the number of children, unfortunately. So I just hope that they can, source some new families or build some new homes in the area to attract or re-attract people who've left the area to come back and and raise their families in the rural Preselis, North Pembrokeshire area.
So what kinds of activities did you get involved in outside of school when you were a young boy?
So when we were growing up on dairy farms, there's always an opportunity for sports. At that time, we didn't have the rugby club in Crymych. That came when I was in my youth. I played rugby for Cardigan Youth before Crymych Rugby Club was formed in the 80s. So I was fortunate to be one of the first players in the youth club in Crymych. So there was quite a gap between Cardigan and Narberth. There was no sporting clubs. But during that time, then the swimming pool in Crymych was built, and on the secondary school site, and then the leisure centre, so that there were more opportunities for sporting activities. There was a football. A cricket. There was a cricket club in Crymych, but I never got into cricket at that time.
No. What about any sort of cultural activities? What about Eisteddfod or anything like that?
Yeah, all primary schools took part in the Urdd competitions. School Eisteddfod. You then go on to the Cylch Eisteddfod and on to the county, and then all Wales Urdd. So yeah, it was a very good way. We were encouraged to take part in art, submit different categories of art, which I enjoyed, and then also the taking part in reciting. And I can't say that my parents were pushy parents, but they wanted their children to do well, so we were coached by other family members. Not that it did much good, mind you, but you try. Parents want to see their children having the utmost opportunity and confidence building. And I started taking part in Ysgol Sul Sunday School. Llwynarhwrdd was our school, Sunday school. Llwynarhwrdd Chapel, a big chapel underneath Tegrin, and on my father's side then, and his grandfather there, that was our family plot on the, as I said, on the Tomos side. But then on the other side of the family was Star Baptist Chapel, where the other family members are buried. Yeah.
What kind of sort of services, facilities were in the area that may have changed over time? Shops and businesses?
Well, growing up on a farm, it was always exciting to see the grocery van come round. So we had Mr. John from Cwmfelin Mynach coming round with groceries, and I remember his big green van. Well, it seemed big, it probably wasn't, but I was, as a child, it did seem quite an exciting presence on the forecourt. And it was always an exciting presence on the farmyard. And then we would have the shop in Glog. Dyfed Glog would come around with some clothing from my grandmother. And then also we would have a gentleman come around with farm clothes, so it felt as if there was more mobile provision in rural areas, but also then you had the shops. And I always remember from school we would have the minibus and stopping in Llanfyrnach shop with Dai a Fair Idol in the shop in Llanfyrnach was always good to get some sweets. And then in Tegrin itself there was post office shop, garage, and in its heyday there were more shops. Obviously everywhere everybody had shops, but as bigger supermarkets came online, so the small shops disappeared, and garages, there was always a few petrol pumps around, weren't there? people would have them on the side of the road, and you could pick up, buy petrol quite easily from small providers. But no, it was, everything was there that was needed, and nobody seemed to go with, nobody went without. And yes, and we grew, as I said, we grew potatoes and runner beans, and different types of vegetables were grown in the corner of a field. And yeah, there was self-reliance to some degree, and if a cow was sometimes you would have meat at home, so it was there was nobody starved. I felt everybody had enough, but then again there was nobody was enticed with other luxuries. There was no mobile phone, there was no Sky, there was no monthly payments for this, that and the other, so it was much more of a simpler time. But then again, when time came to move from home, you would need a mortgage and pay for a car and pay for a house was needed. But I think things changed then in the 80s and 90s, that mobile phones, and people seemed to think that they needed more provision, more luxuries, and then obviously you needed to have earned more money to pay for these luxuries then.
Definitely. So moving on a little bit, would your own family have had an interest in the local history at all of the area?
I would say so, because our families had been in the area. My father and my mother's families were Carmarthenshire, Pembrokeshire people. My mother brought up in Alma, Pandy, Alma, not far, just at the side of Trelech, but in Carmarthenshire. And then the family who had a burial plot in Llwynarhwrdd Chapel were descended from a preacher, Morgan Jones, who came from Powys, I believe. And yeah, we were encouraged to learn about, our family tree. And then on the anniversary of his birth or his death, I can't remember now, but 500 of his descendants had a concert in Llwynarhwrdd Chapel. It was a big chapel, as I said, because there was a quarry underneath, or by Llwynarhwrdd, Glog Quarry, and in its heyday, it was a slate quarry. It employed over 100 people as a slate quarry. So industrial heritage is important in the area. And in Llanfyrnach, the lead and silver mines employed a lot of people in its time. And one branch of the family then was Glog Farm and Llwynarhwrdd Farm. They were quite industrious and had shops in London. And one family member then took it upon himself to push ahead with the Whitland Cardigan Railway.
So Cardi Bach then?
Cardi Bach, with one branch of the family. So John Owen was his name, as I said, descended from those farming families, but he had a shop or shops in London, and then reinvested some of that money into the private railway, the Cardigan-Whitland Railway in 1880s, and got local people to local land gentry, local vicars, and the church to invest in the railway company as shareholders. So he was issuing shares in. So yes, he was issuing shares in 1880. So maybe that's where I got the bug for community share offers with the work I do currently.
Indeed. Were there any sort of stories or anything that were passed down to you from parents at all, or from family members?
The farm with us pantomime Llwyndrain, because there is another pantomime in Blaenwain area, Llywynio. But pantomime Isha was an ruin at the bottom of the valley, and the valley is there's a little river there, a little brook really. It's Pedran, and then it goes on to underneath Llundain was Cwm Pedran, a village of 8 or 9 houses, but now totally derelict. And Pedran went on to the Cich River in Cwm Cich, and then obviously the Cich goes on to Abercich into the Teifi. So apparently there was talk of there was a medieval or even Celtic, I don't know really, a battle in the Pedran Valley underneath the farm, and I thought it was some kind of a myth, but somebody actually sent me information from Abergwili Museum of artifacts and swords that were dug up on the farm, on the bottom fields of the valley, at a Wain. That field apparently had some artifacts dug up in the 1920s, 1930s, I think. So yeah, there is that history around us, and on the map of the farm, then on current maps, there's a tumulus where there's an ancient burial ground on the farm. So yeah, you as a child, you take it for granted that everybody lives like that. It's only when you're older you appreciate the way you've been brought up in a rural setting with some interesting ancient artifacts and landmarks in and around. And as you come out from our farm lane, you look across at the Frenny Fawr, the large hill, and then the Frenny Fach are very, very sort of distinct on our landscape. Whereas obviously if you're in Blaenforce or Crymych, the Frenny Fawr's different aspect, different visual. But with us, it's an interesting two hill sort of site across the fields. Yes.
Do you know about any traditions in the Preselis area that are still practiced today?
Well, we were brought up and learnt in school predominantly about Fari Lwyd and its celebrations, or Hen Galan in Gwaun Valley, the old New Year on the 13th of January. Was talked about. They were. I remember as a child, our parents making a real effort to take us around farms, especially when there are old people. We would actually go out about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and would sing in the New Year on the 31st of December, 1st of January. And then the older people really felt that it was important to encourage children to come and sing early in the morning, and before it was dawn.
Gosh.
We were singing.
So it was, well, it would be pitch black then.
It was pitch black, and but apparently that was the tradition with us.
Wow.
In our sort of area.
It's interesting.
It was, but obviously you needed parents to drive you around. But and me and my brother then would yell out "Blwyddyn Newydd Dda," and then if an envelope would come thud to the ground, okay, it was £1. But the best one was the one that fluttered down. Because you knew then they contained pound notes and £5 notes, so the nice fluttering envelopes were great, and people were, I think if we took our children around now, or grandchildren, at that time of the morning, I think there'd be people yelling, "Go back to bed." But
so it's not practiced now?
I don't think so. Not that I don't live in Llundain now, but there's still some fundraising. I think it's more carol singing, and young farmers and Merched y Wawr would come out carol singing. But for people who live down lanes, and we live down a half-mile lane, to have anybody come down was quite an occasion then, wasn't it? Because you'd only see reps, agricultural reps, and
it's quite isolated.
It was, and the odd Cilwendig rally chap who'd gone lost. Remember one chap took the wrong turning at the top of the lane, and thought he was going the right way and landed up in the slurry pit.
Oh dear, rallied down the lane.
Rallied down the lane and didn't brake and landed in the slurry pit, but anyway.
Oh dear.
That was an experience.
So what's it like to live in the Preselis area today?
So today I've been fortunate to have employment that allowed me to stay in the roughly this area of my birth. So that's been good, to have grown up and gone through cultural experiences of the Aelwyd yr Urdd. The Aelwyd in Crymych was a very strong Aelwyd in its day, with choirs and sketches, and asked to perform in Noson Lawen on TV and concerts. And the Young Farmers, I was lucky to straddle both organisations, so it gave you a confidence of public speaking. So today, those, they're still there, the Aelwyd, and the Young Farmers Club that I attended was Hermon, and that's gone from strength to strength in that we were 15, 20 members when I was in my teenage years, early 20s, and it's now, it's gone up to over 70 members.
It's a large club, yeah.
It's a large club now, and the main reason for that is that when the school closed in the village, Hermon, where my kids were attending, we were very disappointed, to lose a primary school, as any community would be. But we decided that we did challenge the closure, so much so that we found a solicitor from Cardiff, Michael Imperato, and we were able to gain some funds to employ a barrister, and we challenged the closure in the High Court in London. So we attended the Strand in 2003, and the judge came down in our favour that the High Court hearing did not allow the local authority to close the school.
So how was that like being a part of that at that time? Because it was quite a pivotal period in the...
It was. It did set. Yeah, it did challenge authority, challenged, the local education directors and people in local government were challenged, as they should be, and so that from that winning the High Court hearing in 2003, we were asked then to challenge not just local government, but Welsh Government policy was that of closure of schools, rural schools that were empty, that were very had low numbers, but the Hermon school were full to capacity. So that was our argument. Why are you closing a full to capacity Victorian school? Obviously 52 pupil capacity, but it was full. So they were saying because other nearby schools were half empty, that we were drawn into that cluster, and that the 3 school amalgamation had to happen. Well, we challenged that because we had our own community, and so we went back to the High Court in 2004 in Strand in London, and so we had our barrister. We could only afford so much days, and then obviously we were against barristers and solicitors from the local authority and barristers and solicitors from Welsh Government. So a bit of a David and Goliath affair really, because we had limited funds, and we won the High Court hearing in London. But then the local authority and Welsh Government insisted on a full judicial review, and that was held in Cardiff, and they said it would 1 day of barrister time, but unfortunately it wasn't 1 day, it was 5 days, and at the end of the 5 days the judge came down in favour of the local authority and Welsh Government, so the school had to shut. So many of the pupils, especially the older primary pupils, it was a historic event. They were encouraged to attend, and then hearing the loss of the school, it was a shame really that they did attend, because there were lots of young children crying at the loss of their primary school.
I know, I was one of them, yes, but it was an interesting time, I think, in the history of the Preselis area, because it really showed that strength of community in such a rural, small area really. But what happened then? What happened to the Ysgol Hermon then?
So, well, before this, thinking about the site, we had the not so nice pleasure of opening an envelope with legal costs in it. By losing the full judicial review, it meant all the legal costs then came back on us. Although the Welsh Government and local authority did ask the judge to load their costs onto the parents as well, which would have been 150,000 legal costs from the local authority, and the judge was adamant that that the parents should not bear that cost, which is good. But then our cost of our solicitor and barrister was £89,000. So we had to think of that. There was some VAT, I think there was about 8,000 of VAT. So somehow we managed to register for VAT and got that recovered. And then still 80,000, and we had the first ever group legal aid approval for 50% of the legal costs. So 40,000 is cleared, and then we held concerts and a big auction with Bryn Terfel, Cris Matthews, Ryan Giggs, people sending stuff because they'd heard of our efforts, and I think we cleared 30,000 in an auction, and the rest then through fundraising. So we cleared our debts, and then we looked at what we're going to do with trying to buy the old school, because there was no village hall in the village, so of Hermon. So we went at it to do a community share offer. Somebody told me that the Industrial Provinces Society, regulated by the then FCA, is now FSA, Financial Service Authority, is now the FCA, Financial Conduct Authority, but it was the Providence Society's mutuals, and we created a mutual society to raise community shares in 2007, and we raised enough money then through the shares and some grants to buy the building. The Victorian Hall, Victorian School became a hall, and yes, so we suddenly owned it. So that was a bit of a silver lining, but soon we saw that people were coming to use it for yoga and the people with young farmers, the choir. So it soon became apparent that the old Victorian School hall was not big enough. So we applied to big lottery and community facilities grants, and we clinched over £500,000 to build a two-storey eco extension to the old Victorian School, and a big 250 capacity hall, 2 conference rooms, and 5 offices to be let to make some revenue to maintain the hall. We put 9 kilowatt solar panel array, a hot water solar thermal array, and then an air source heat system was put in, and it was quite sort of ahead of its time. A timber frame building with warm cell recycled paper insulation, underfloor heating from the air source heat system, solar tunnel lighting, so that we didn't have to turn the lights on too much. So yeah, and we also were fortunate to have just got into the feed-in tariff offered at that time, so we were getting some feed-in rates as well. So this new building was totally self-reliance in terms of the energy costs were covered from feed-in tariffs, and people were renting the space. We did cheekily put in a community bar, so there was a hall and a bar facility, and a cafe was opened by some young people, and then the school nursery was still full to capacity, just to really show that if the school had remained open, there was enough young families there to have kept it running. So
at the time, that building was one of the first of its kind, really, as in for local community centres. A lot of them have since been refurbished or had renovations in the Preselis area, but I think at the time Hermon was leading the way, really.
Yes, we went to look at other similar developments in West Wales. Llanarthmi, near the Botanic Gardens there, they put in a water ground source heat system running off the water in a nearby stream. So we took from that, and we went to see a few other, leading halls just gone up. So yeah, we made sure we learnt from best practice and built a community centre that is still functioning well, 15 years on, minimal repairs. And that's the key really, is to keep the running costs low, because it's volunteers who have to run it and raise money for them. So the more you can do, the better. And what we did do in 2004 also was contacted Planet, who had European funding to do community action plans. So a community action plan is like a neighbourhood plan where local people get together to say what's good, bad, what's needed, doing a SWOT analysis. A SWOT analysis is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. So we looked at our SWOT analysis, and one of the outcomes there was let's try and buy the school building. Tick, we did. But an interesting one was let's try and harness renewable energy, which we did with the solar panels on the school. But also what we started planning in 2006, 2007 was a community-owned wind turbine. Now we came up against a lot of planning objections or planning issues, let's say, from the local authority. But when the Future Generations Act came into force in Wales in 2015, community energy was at its heart, really. So when we reapplied or applied for the third time for our community wind turbine, we were now being supported by the Future Generations Act. And really the local authority planning department could not turn it down, really, because it was on community. So 2016 we were approved. Then we had to find the correct site and do all the environmental impact assessments, and by 2018 we'd ordered the EWT 900 kilowatt turbine from Germany, and October 2019 the blades and the tower were put in place, and we started generating renewable energy. And it's I remember talking to a lot of people who weren't sure about wind, and the wind turbines were a bit of a landscape visual impact, of course. But as a few wise people were saying, Preacher, I remember saying that he'd seen so much devastation, that high winds taken off barns, even with us on the farm during the 1980s snowdrift storm. We lost roofs on the shed, and we were feeding cows, and we got stuck in the drifts, myself and my father and my brother. So my mum and my grandmother were at home, worried sick, and the roof of the old cow sheds had gone off in the wind and the snow. And his Preacher was saying there's so much damage been done by wind, and it's great now that we harness this energy to do some good. So we know the Preselis, the level of the wind storms have done it damage in many places. So now harnessing that energy is something that we should be proud of.
So there are many environmental or sort of conservation type projects happening across the Preselis area today?
Well, within our parish in Llanfyrnach, where Hermon is, so from that community action plan that we did in the community in 2004, 2005, we've managed to set up Cwmarian Renewable Energy, so an acronym CARE, Cwmarian Renewable Energy. So CARE has been very successful in gaining environmental projects, one being growing better connections, looking at hedgerow and tree planting, and how hedgerows can be developed for wildlife and environmental impact. But also Clean Rivers project with a Naver, working with volunteers in the community to look at cleansing, having rivers being more clean, which is very topical with sewerage and pollution in the river affecting the biodiversity and the fish levels. So yes, the Cymru and Renewable Energy, I'm a director, so I was the founding chairman of that out of the Community Action Plan, and it's now employing 13 people. Obviously the wind turbine has been successful, and with the uplift in exporting energy to the grid, we've seen a quadrupling of revenues because of the increased energy costs. But just goes to show, if we're quadrupling our community income, I can't imagine how much the corporate pockets are benefiting. And the question, of course, is where is all that corporate revenue going? Is it coming back to serve the local people or serve the people in our country? I don't know. But when you have a community energy project and a community environmental project, well, you know it's all going to be spent local. So I think there's a big learning in that sort of environmental development. And across the Preselis, there are solar farms. We Coastal Uplands is just the Pen-y-Bryn on the edge of Preselis, and that was the first solar farm in Wales, Coastal Uplands, and the owner there, Glenn Peters, very community orientated, built a new oak hall near the Derwen on the site, near the solar park, and also prototyped a new way of building modular housing called T-Solar. So instead of slates on the roof, you put you build in solar panels, which obviously are waterproof, etc., but saving on slates and creating energy for an eco home. So no, there are great examples across the Preselis of using energy and water, hydrogen opportunities. In Capel Newin, New Chapel, there's an old mansion there, Fanone, and had its own hydro system back in 1910s, 1920s, and obviously as the National Grid approached it, it was abandoned, but it's still there with a leak and a big lake. So there are opportunities to develop and re-establish hydro systems in the area, which I'm sure we will be doing.
Great. So moving on a little bit then, are you fluent in the Welsh language?
Yes.
Yes.
My first language.
And what proportion now do you think speak Welsh in the Preseli area? Is it a strong Welsh heartland?
Well, when I was a child, it most definitely was, 60, 70, maybe even 80% in some parishes. But with the population, people, local people moving away, house prices increasing, affordability for local families is a very key main factor of local young people moving away and not coming back. But the recent census to 2021, the statistics continue to be examined, but Crymych, Preseli, Crymych areas, El Suru, continue to be over 50% Welsh speakers, but then other areas have declined as older people pass away, and unfortunately their houses and their small holdings are only affordable predominantly by people who have sold houses in the southeast of Wales or southeast or in England. So that ability and affordability is a real problem, and I now am chair of Crymych Community Council, a relatively small community council as precept goes, but Crymych, has 1,800 population, and we get a precept of 12,000 a year, and we're now looking at a community land trust, housing trust, to see if we can buy some land and work with house builders to actually build houses for local people, but instead of being council houses, regulated from County Hall, or housing associations, which seem to have amalgamated into bigger organisations over the last decade. We're looking at a community land trust, housing trust, where it would be a local share offer, say £10 a share for people to have an ownership, and it would be a local committee who then would oversee the letting and of the affordable housing in our community. So I'm hopeful that we can develop the community land trust in Crimich, but that can spread into other communities, and then anybody who wants to leave a bit of land or sell land reasonably priced next to the boundary of the building area of the village, then exceptional planning consent would be sought, where then 12, 15, 20 houses will be owned by the local community land trust to be let to local young families, support the school, support some new business opportunities. Hopefully in Crimich we're lucky, we've got Parc Gwynfryn as a private industrial estate, with Mr. and Mrs. Evans, Gary and Delith Evans, being taking the entrepreneurial plunge of building an industrial estate, and it's worked really well. There's probably 150 odd people being employed in different units. There's Vrenny Transport is a big employer, about 70 people, and then you have garages and units.
There's lots of different businesses.
There are, yeah. There's different types. A new upcycling clothing business is there now. Yep. Some people from Glendoor are developing that, and EV vehicles, storage units, boomerang signs,
yes.
Cleaning, Westward's Cleaning, I'm trying to think of them all now, Brooks Barn. So yeah, they're really interesting micro businesses who have a potential to grow, and having space in that industrial unit site has made a difference. So all we need then in the ingredients are affordable housing. So if people have got jobs, and but the key is obviously not to spend too much on rent and mortgage, which means you have an affordable, decent living without having to work 2 or 3 jobs. So it's that key really of not being burdened with a millstone of mortgage and rent, but build it, having a house that is eco, in terms of energy, low energy costs, low running costs, and ideally low building costs.
And keeping local families here then with children in the Welsh-speaking school and community would hopefully help the language to continue then.
Absolutely. The idea being that the area of Crimich and areas of the Preselis identified as areas of importance for the Welsh language, and that being recognised by government to preserve that unique heritage, linguistic heritage.
So do the people of the Preselis area, including yourself, count that sort of Welshness as a really intrinsic part of your cultural heritage?
Absolutely. No, you appreciate it more now than when we were young, because we took it for granted to some degree, because there was so many Welsh speakers. I don't think we learnt English till we were 6 or 7 in school, but now of course the numbers of families who are fluent Welsh speakers is less. You have a lot of support from families who've moved in, who want to see their children go through Welsh medium education, which is fantastic, and that's the hope, isn't it? That the future generations then will embrace the language, that can work through the medium of Welsh, enjoy and play rugby and play football, play cricket through the medium of Welsh, play hockey, and take part in cultural activities and aelwyd and ffermwyr ifanc, but also then as other sort of community activities in village halls, and just make sure that everybody has a decent lifestyle and can, you know, get that work-life balance right to have a fulfillful life. Yeah. Beth yw'r gair dim fulfillful, beth yw'r gair dim fulfilled. Whatever.
Fulfilled.
And hope then that everybody has a fulfilled, enjoyable, decent life.
Definitely. How much do you think that the hills themselves, the mountains, locally we say mountains, don't we? How much do you think that is important to local people? Are they important to you?
Well, I think people take a lot of pride in saying that you live in the Preselis areas. You learn the history of the Bluestone, the Cromlechs, and that that ancient linking of Stonehenge and ancient peoples of the area of the UK, the British Isles, but obviously the language and sort of a Celtic theme is important for us to understand the history of the area and roots. So yeah, I think people are very sort of.
Have you got a favourite walk across the mountain at all, or anyone that you've walked in the past that you've?
Yeah, the walk up to Foel-Tregarn and across the top then above Rosebush, and then of course you've got to end up in Tafan Sink for a drink.
So have you walked? That's the Ffordd Eiraidd, the Golden Road. Have you walked that one in the past? We
have as a family. Yeah, it's been great to on a sunny day. The views are fantastic. So yeah, Foel-Tregarn and as children, and in Preselis school we used to have days. End of term days would be Foel-Tregarn Day up to the top, and then obviously closer to home we've got Brenny Fawr, and Brenny Fawr is an interesting one with Maxen Wledig and Dafydd Iwan's song now of Ni Yma o Hyd, and Maxen Wledig, the Roman emperor who supposedly united Wales yn y flwyddyn 383 in 383. But so apparently that Roman general had a camp up on the Brenny Fawr, and I think there's some reference to it as once being called Cader Maxen, Brenny Fawr. So yes, it's important that young people are taught about the stories, and also the Mabinogion, I taught Trwyth, the fables of the Mabinogion, and as I mentioned, our farm was on that Pedran, small river Pedran that ran into the Keich River, and the Mabinogion have a very, I mentioned the Keich Valley of hunting the wild boar, Pryderi, so it's and the entrance to the other world, not the underworld, the other world, which it's not like an entrance to hell or anything, it's entrance to another place, is in the Keich Valley.
In
Annwn.
In Fanone then?
Yes, in that woodland area.
With the waterfalls?
Yes, apparently. So.
Have you been through there?
I've been down part. Well, that's where I saw the old mansion, the Fanone Mansion's hydro system. If you look as you walk to the waterfall, if you look down before you come to the lake, so the lake was the elite that served water into the hydro system. So if you look, there are these huge tubes, huge sort of iron pipes that are broken into pieces. Right. So that's part of the old hydro system. So wouldn't it be great if we could reinstate that and create hydrogen power? So anyway, but not today. I've got enough on my plate today.
But you haven't been to Annwn, through the other world? I
haven't been there yet. I will have to take a dive into the waterfall.
I'm just going to check. Fine.
Ni'n gwybod siarad.
Byddwch yn hirach. Ni fi ar awr, so byddai ddim lot yn hirach ar. Mae'r haul yma'n sa'n gallu gweld. How do you feel about increasing tourism in the Preselis area? Are there any challenges or potential benefits?
You know, my work, day-to-day work now, is involved with community share offers and helping communities to save pubs that might close, shops, and other sort of asset-based activities. So yeah, having that tourism lift of income is important for business, for livelihoods. So with a community pub like Tafarn Sink, and recently then the White Hart in Llandidoch, St Mills, we're now trying to buy the Crymych Arms in Crymych, the Castle community, Hayes Castle, trying to buy the Cross Inn. So, and then in Trefdraeth, Newport, Pembrokeshire, the community bought the Havard's 1840 Havard's shop was threatened with closure and it might have been changed to house, but the community rallied and raised 450,000 to buy that. So these community assets are great now. They've been bought by the community, people investing money and having a share certificate. Another, I mentioned in our village, we did the share offer in 2007 for the old school, which had a cafe and offering opportunities for nights out. So, tourism is important. The other one that I got involved with was in Cardigan, buying Central Park with 2 car parks, but also buying the Victorian Police Station and courthouse and 5 flats. So the courthouse is now, the police station and courthouse is now a bunkhouse for 28 people. I might well give it a plug. 28 people can come and stay in the old police station Cardigan, in the old cells, and the other rooms now are family room and big room. So there's 28 beds, and it's £280 a night. So it's £10 each. Wow. But say you haven't got 28 people, even though if you only had 14 people, it's £20 a night, and it's got kitchen facility, and so it's really worthwhile having if you look at Dyfed, we've called it police. Heddwas is policeman. So Dyfed in Cardigan is a good story but it's dependent on tourism.
Yes.
As are the pubs and the shop. So it's that balance of ensuring local people have jobs and decent housing, but if that can be sort of topped up with tourism funding, of tourism funds and money, then it makes a viable business. So it's that ownership element, really, isn't it? That you want the money circulated back into the local community rather than an asset company, some pension fund or some international property company buying up farms and buying up land and shops where any profits is taken out of the area. And obviously that's one delicate area with supermarkets. They obviously provide cheaper food mostly, but obviously it's gone up lately. But the reality is any profits are taken back by the company and shareholders outside the area. So how do you balance that is an interesting question. And in my view, the more tax power that Wales has to actually ensure then that profits generated in Wales remain in Wales is and ideally are distributed back to the regions or to the counties, so that counties do not lose their individual GDP level. That extraction of money is an important element that needs to be addressed across the world, really. A local people who have local resources benefit from that resource.
So, what challenges do you think the Preselis area will face in the short and long-term future?
The effect of global warming is unknown to some degree, and our natural habitats, our ecosystems in the Preselis area, are quite fragile. I remember listening and reading Yola Williams explaining how there are quite rare sort of bioamrywiaeth, biodiversity, biodiversity, insects and plants, carnivorous plants on the Preselis. I once read it's amazing that there are sort of these carnivorous plants up there on the marshes, and the threat is if there's global warming and these marshes dry up, then there is an effect on wildlife and plants biodiversity. So that is a risk, a real damaging risk. So that's a threat, and obviously then the other threat is that we lose the balance, the balance of generational demographics. That if there are more older people, then obviously there's a greater need for carers and older people provisions, and the NHS level become more acute because we won't have as many young people in the area. So it's that balance of demographics, biodiversity, land use is a challenging period for us. And tourism has its place, but then you don't want over tourism. So it's a balance. But I think we need to look at places like Croatia and some of the European smaller states to see how they actually own their tourism more, and that it's local communities have more of a buy-in, and maybe there should be some kind of a directive, or that fine if you have investment money coming in, but it has to be balanced with local people having an ownership or an opportunity to own sort of hotels and provision. And I think we have that to a degree, don't we? That farms have diversified, and you have sort of local ownership on camping sites. But the threat is if these campsites become owned by bigger conglomerates, then that all that profit, all that surplus leaves the area. And somebody was telling me the other day there were a lot of private care homes, older people homes in Preselis area vicinity, but lots of them have been bought out by bigger consortiums who have pension fund profits to fulfill, and the threat is that profit becomes more prominent than the actual service. So we have to make sure that doesn't happen in tourism or any other sector for that matter. Yeah.
So to close the interview, is there anything else that you'd like to mention that we haven't covered about your life in the Preselis area?
So the only sort of recent developments of community ownership that I've had that I've been blessed to have been involved with is that we're currently we're through team efforts that local energy can be owned by local communities, but local buildings, local land ownership, local farm ownerships. So we're an interesting project now in the village of buying the old chapel. The roof was terrible, and the congregation, the members of the chapel decided that they couldn't afford the repairs, but they've sold it now to a community benefit society, local investors, to turn the chapel into a heritage centre on the ground floor, but then 2 flats, affordable rented flats on the first floor. And unfortunately in today's society we're seeing a lot of churches and chapels closing. Now, wouldn't it be great if there was an opportunity for the community to develop affordable housing or a heritage centre on the ground floor, and then celebrate all those industrial heritage activities and agricultural heritage being captured, so that when somebody new to the area or somebody buys a house, be it their main house or a second home or a holiday let, that as part of their understanding of the area they're moving into or buying a property in, that they have to come to the local heritage centre to understand, that that there's been a society in the area dating back millennia, but more recently, the Welsh language, and that when they do buy property in the area, they have a responsibility.
And they can gain a deeper understanding into the area's culture.
Yes, and if their desire is a holiday let, well, as part of the visitor experience, please come along to your village heritage centre to explain, why this place is unique and why people want to hold on to the Welsh language and continue to speak Welsh, and hopefully encourage them to learn the language.
Great. Well, diolch yn fawr, Cris. Thank you very much for your time.
Diolch i chi.